Hi, it's Paul Camillos. Welcome to Series 6 of Shooting the Breeze. Join me and my co-host Jacinta Govind alongside the STB crew as we cover women's hoops and women in hoops. We'll share conversations and get a little deeper with inspiring players, amazing coaches, and the legends from behind the scenes. Especially in this series, we'll be talking to dream chasers that give it their all and lead with their heart.
I wanted to give all this information on to the next generation coming up. And here we are in 2024. I've been doing it since now 2007.
Wow.
So going on nearly 20 years now, I've built all these relationships with the USA coaches, and I can connect them to all the girls that are wanting to take this option to the USA colleges.
Welcome to our series wrap. It's been a massive Series 6. 10 months of fortnightly podcasting covering the WNBL, NBL 1, Tauihi New Zealand developments, and touching on the Paris Olympics. We've featured some amazing trailblazers in our Dream Chasers series, and of course, more live pods, with some groundbreakers like our roaming mic live at the Q and the WNBL Awards live from the orange carpet. We also welcome special guest Sam Tomlinson to talk about her mission to help foster the US college pathway for promising athletes as part of her business. With 20 years experience in helping parents and players be aware of their options and about the pitfalls and challenges in this space, it's a fascinating discussion. Finally, I want to say thanks to my fellow STB crew for an amazing Series 6, and especially a big thank you to our listeners and supporters of the pod. Enjoy. Welcome to Shooting the Breeze. Joining me, my co-host Jacinta Govind, and it's a wrap of Season 6. Jacinta, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm really good, thanks, Paul. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. And I've got to say, it's been an interesting last few weeks. There's been a lot going on in the basketball world, but it's also, I think, a good time between NBL 1 and WNBL starting to get a bit of time out and a bit of time away from basketball to kind of recharge and reset.
Yeah, I'm certainly feeling that way at the moment. The NBL 1 season was pretty huge for me personally, covering two different leagues at the same time. But there were lots of achievements and milestones made and reached during that season. So it was certainly worth it, but I'm glad to have some work-life balance back in my life.
Yeah, I agree. It's just been so much going on. And I mean, you were at the NBL 1 finals. How was that?
It was really great. For this year, the NBL 1 Nationals was held in the Sunshine Coast across two different venues. So men's and women's competition alternated between each venue on each day. And the venue where the grand final was held was USC, so I think the University of the Sunshine Coast Sporting Facilities, and it created a really great finals atmosphere. It had a pretty decent sized grandstand and scoreboard, and a lot of people ended up coming, especially for the men's final, given that Mackay were participating. And yeah, it was a great atmosphere. It was a very hectic weekend for us commentators. We basically hit the ground running. A lot of the commentators from overseas had a great opportunity to increase their skills in broadcasting. So we had an opportunity to do pre and post game interviews, sideline reporting, and obviously commentating with a lot of different other people as well, and on different teams that we weren't familiar with. But our commentator group were fantastic. Everyone had a great attitude. Everyone got along really well. And while we were very, very tired by the end of it, we certainly had a come down period for the next few days because the dream was over pretty much. It all happened in a flash.
Yeah, like from watching it, there seemed to be an awful lot going on. And you guys were also doing multiple games on the same day, but in different roles. I mean, you know, I know you got to call the NBL 1 grand final for the women's, and I got to say that game was a bit of a surprise.
Yeah, it really was a surprise. We were definitely expecting a closer contest between Waverley Falcons and the Bendigo Braves, especially given their history through the NBL 1 South season and how successful they were that weekend. But Waverley, yeah, they were just steamrolled Bendigo. I'm not too sure what was happening with Bendigo that day. There are a lot of changes that they perhaps could have been made and tried, but yeah, we just didn't see them, unfortunately, and Waverley had a very convincing win.
Yeah, it looked to me like Bendigo had no answers. It was almost like as soon as the break started to happen in the scoreline, Bendigo just seemed to freeze up in terms of what do we do next? They weren't sure what decision to make. It was almost like they were trying to push their current position, let's keep doing what we're doing and hopefully there'll be a change. And it just wasn't happening for them.
Yeah, I saw the same thing. They just kept trying what was working for them before, and it wasn't working for them in the grand final, but they didn't make any changes to overcome that. They just, like you said, just kept, I guess, pursuing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result, and that's not what they got.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting that it was such a blowout, given how close the game was for the NBL 1 South final.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that really went to the wire for Waverley. But as you know, the likes of Carly Ernst and Bet Cole, whenever they get into grand final mode, they will do whatever it takes to make sure they get a win. And Bet Cole, I think she had 22 points in the first half or something like that. Like, she will just get into hyper focus and make sure it gets done for her team. That she's just so super competitive. I think that was an X factor that we forgot to account for.
Yeah, but to be fair, like a few of most of the conferences from the games that I saw, the conference finals were pretty tight. I mean, I certainly in New South Wales at East, it was a real close game. It could have gone either way for either Sutherland or Newcastle.
Yeah, that's right. And yeah, it was really just about, as the basketball cliche goes, particularly around finals matches, it just depends on how you play on the day or what team turns up, as they say, on the day.
Yeah.
And it all just comes down to that 40 minutes and nothing more. And yeah, Sutherland had plenty of opportunities in that last 2.5 minutes to put the game away, and they just didn't do it. And Newcastle did.
Yeah. It was like they were going and then ran out of puff just in those last 2-3 minutes and didn't have any answers for what Newcastle were bringing to the table.
Newcastle always have a never say die attitude, and that's probably what makes them so successful and such gritty competitors. Yeah, and they certainly were able to showcase that at NBL 1 as well. They had their final match against Southern District Spartans, and for a game that was how did they say, consolation game, I think, where neither team was going to make the final and they were just playing an extra game. It was still really, really competitive. Like, both teams still played their absolute best. They didn't kind of use it as a throwaway, but they came in with their competitive attitudes. And that was still a really competitive game for a consolation game.
I think when you get to that end of the season, there's no such thing as a consolation game because you're playing for pride.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And from being up there, was there anything from there that really surprised you or that you kind of really took your attention?
I think maybe I have my bias glasses on, but I think in the men's competition, Maitland didn't play their best on the first day. And had they played their best, that like we saw in the back end of the NBL 1 East season and in the grand final, had they played that same level and caliber, they would have been really competitive and pushing for a spot in the finals at Nationals. So I was surprised that I could say with a lot of teams, I was surprised a lot of teams still didn't have that super high level of competitiveness. Some of them looked like they were playing and they were on holiday. But I kind of took pride in the fact that I would say Maitland on their best day versus some of the other teams like Forestville from Central on their best day. They didn't have Daniel Johnson when the two teams played against each other, sure. But I would say East, in terms of level of caliber and competition, is certainly becoming way more competitive and can certainly compete with the best of the rest. But I was talking to Nicole Munger actually after the game against Southern District Spartans, who were the team that represented NBL 1 North.
Yep.
And it was she kind of indicated as a bit of a wake-up call for her and the whole team, where they're like, wow, if Spartans were the 4th or 5th best team in the North and they didn't bring their full squad and they still beat us, that kind of just goes to show how competitive North really is. So I think it was a great opportunity or litmus test for a lot of teams to see how they stack up against the rest, particularly the teams from the East. But other surprises, I mean, there was a lot of talk at the competition about there was surprise about ticket numbers, but some of the big name NBL players weren't going to be there, and I imagine that would have attracted more tickets. But I think I'd love to see how many people were actually watching online, because going to the Sunshine Coast for a weekend, flights, accommodation, car hire, that's not really in everyone's budget right now.
No.
So considering the amount of tickets that they sold for the weekend and especially for the final, I think you've got to still try and take that as a little bit of a win. And it's still a really good opportunity for everyone else that helps put the games on, showcase their skills or improve their skills at a different level. Like I said, for us as commentators, great opportunity. I've never done sideline reporting before, so the first time I did it was the men's grand final, so no pressure. But that was a great opportunity for me to learn that as a new skill, and I'm addicted to sideline reporting now. So if anyone needs a sideline reporter, call me up because I really enjoyed it. But even for our statisticians and people who run the bench and the referees, like it's also a really great social gathering and reunion for us. And, you know, the referees get to flex their muscles a little bit more. So everyone that makes the game as well or puts on game day have an opportunity to learn and boost some new skills. And it's kind of what you want at the end of the day, to create pathways in every different facet of the game.
Absolutely. Okay, so going on to Tauihi, New Zealand, and I know this is a topic we always keep coming back to on the pod because there's a lot going on. This season for them, particularly with the number of imports that are going in and the names that are showing up, I think this is shaping up to be one of the most interesting women's basketball competitions around. I've been really surprised by the names they've got showing up. You know, we've got people like Mackenzie Forbes showing up. We've got Cassandra Brown, who was at Townsville Fire. Obviously, Talia Tupea, Lara McSpadden, and Morgan Yeager. Previous guest Zoe Richards as well is back again. Like, what's your opinion on what's happening in New Zealand and how it's going to shake things up in women's basketball?
I think it's fantastic what's happening in New Zealand. And when we saw the signings of the likes of, you know, your Cass Browns, your Lara McSpaddens, your Morgan Yeagers, understandably, Chloe Forster as well, who just spent 2 years with the Perth Lynx, is going over.
Yep.
I think a lot of people, understandably, were starting to get scared that the WNBL were losing too many players, but this is exactly what we predicted when we spoke to Justin.
Yeah.
You know, New Zealand's offering shorter league, a higher salary, more bang for your buck if you're a player. And while it's still a developing league and developing its level of consistent competition, the likes of your McSpaddens, your Forsters, your Jaegers, who would all make WNBL rosters but have been fringe players for such a long time, they're going to get way more playing time and playing opportunity. And if I were them and I wanted to make the most or maximize the amount of playing time, you know, I had in my career, I'd be going for this as well. It's such a diverse, like the signings that we know of for Tauihi are so diverse in terms of caliber and experience. You've got the likes of Bailey Flavel, who is a junior. She played at the Under-17 World Cup this year for New Zealand. Comes from a basketball family as well. She was a standout in that team, and she's been with Northern Kahu, I think, for the last 2 seasons in some capacity. So she's going to go up against the likes of your Mackenzie Forbes, your Jordan Horstons.
Yep.
That's just signed, which blows my mind. And then you've also got a lot of college athletes coming back and having a crack at Tauihi, and they can perhaps use it as a stepping stone for other leagues or whether they want to play WNBL again next year. But I think it's just a fantastic idea for people to keep playing at a high level and getting a great pay.
Oh, for sure. And, you know, like you said, the amount of talent and that compressed season has got so much value. And like you said, it's a good payday for the time that they're playing. I'm actually you know, even though there are changes in ownership for the WNBL, which are coming up, I think this is still going to be a huge disruptor to women's basketball throughout Oceania and into Asia as well, because when we spoke to Justin, they were talking about looking to Asia for expansion and for other teams. So, the next 2 to 3 years in women's basketball and women's basketball leagues, I think, is going to be pretty dynamic and really interesting to watch.
And the other thing with the Tauihi League is that it starts early October and it ends just before Christmas. So how great is that? Justin speaks about the work-life balance for athletes. You can play a full season and then still be home for Christmas if you so choose. And then you can have if you're going back to NBL 1, Europe, wherever, you can still have, for a change, you can have a rest.
Yeah.
Like a healthy rest where you can enjoy time with the family over the holiday period, whether you're coming back to Australia, enjoy the summer, rest those niggly injuries. Having a rest between seasons is very rare for our for basketball athletes, particularly female athletes who need to go from season to season to make a living out of it.
Yeah.
So it's obviously different for, an NBL athlete who can just play NBL and have enough money to survive for the rest of the year, whereas our female athletes don't have that. So I think the rest at the end and being home for Christmas has to be a pretty big selling point too.
Oh, for sure. And then you've got the other thing which throws a spanner in the works for the WNBL, which is the number of players that are going into Europe this year. It changed the whole picture of the rosters that are out there. Look, in some ways it's good because it gives other Australian talent an opportunity to get out there and get on the floor, but something's got to change in the WNBL, right? With the new ownership, something's got to change to be able to make it more attractive to the players to stay and not consider those other leagues. And you really kind of wonder what that could be.
I think as well, it is partly because, the WNBL is in this state of flux where a change is needed, and at least a change is coming. But also, I think some of the examples I know of the WNBL athletes who are household names in the community that are now going to Europe for the first time, I think it's also a matter of timing that they needed to go.
Yeah.
And I think the fact that it was their time that they really needed to go, and the fact that the WNBL needs to make changes is sometimes a little bit coincidental, or maybe the fact that the WNBL needs to make changes was the push or one of the deciding factors of I'm going to give Europe a try. I think about Steph Reed, who's been in the WNBL for a good 5-6 seasons now, worked her way up to being the starting point guard of a very successful team under an excellent coach, winning championships. Where else do you go from here, She's only 20-something.
Yeah.
She's certainly not at the ceiling of her game and at what she's able to achieve yet. And sometimes you just need to go to a totally different environment, system, under a different set of eyes to really take your game to a whole nother level and see your game in a different way. So I think the likes of your Steph Reeds and your Alex Sharps who have decided to go, I think is a really great idea for them to put another dimension to their game.
Yeah. Do you think, the fact that Steph Reed didn't get selected for Opals, and let's say we had a lot of options for Opals for the Olympics, was also, potentially a catalyst for her to say, you know what, maybe I do need to get more international experience in Europe, for example, to be able to help raise my game to try and be in frame for an Opals slot for whatever the next thing is.
Possibly. Yeah, that is certainly a possibility. But when we watched her in those pre-Olympic friendlies, I thought she played really, really well. I couldn't see in any of those games what she could have done better that she needs to go away and, go and work on, really. I thought she played fantastic at both ends of the floor in those friendlies. And she was really, really, really unlucky not to be considered in that 12 properly. And it still kind of amazed me how many people online weren't really considering Steph Reed properly as a prospect as for our point guard, because she is the one true point guard that we had in that squad. I was still down the hill that a lot of people we play in the point guard at the moment are still more traditionally shooting guards that we've molded into a one.
Yeah.
To be a point guard, you were born a point guard. You have to have the right temperament, the right IQ, and obviously skill set. But it really comes down to IQ. Yeah, you've got to have, and I think Steph's got the whole package to be our point guard in the Opals.
Yeah. And I don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that there's any problem with Steph's game, because there isn't. But I just sort of wonder sometimes if players, if they don't get considered for, Opal squad, do they sometimes think maybe getting a bit more international experience, step away from Australia, step away from, the known into that other area where it is, and we know that Europe is a crazy competitive league, that it helps to hone skills and maybe develop other areas of play where they may not ordinarily get an opportunity to develop playing if they continue to play in the WNBL.
Yeah, probably. But I think, I don't know how many of people, say in Steph's situation, actively think about that, or if they just think as an individual, I'd like to improve my game in certain ways. And if that means that I get back into the Opal squad, then so be it. Rather than working, I don't know. You'd have to ask the person. It's too hard to say.
Yeah. Okay. So just quickly, there was news that just dropped this week. The Opals are back to number 2.
Yeah, in the Nike Power Rankings, with a point system that I haven't bothered to understand.
Yeah. Yeah, that Nike Power Ranking system is a little bit kind of strange and different, but yeah, the Opals are back up there in number 2 beneath the US, and I think it's a great testament to the team. It is one of the best Opals teams that we've put on the floor for a while, so, it's a really good thing, and it's great to see, and I think all Australians should be really proud of the fact that they are back up there. Okay, now, we've got a surprise guest jumping in and joining us right now. Sam Tomlinson, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
No problem, Sam. First of all, we wanted to have a little bit of a chat to you about college pathways. This is one of these things that you have helped develop for Australian players, and I'm guessing that your own experience has had something to do with it. But before we get into that, maybe it'd be good if you give our listeners who may not know who you are a little bit of background.
Okay, well, my parents, Ray and Sandra Tomlinson, were both part of the senior men and women's Australian national team. My dad was a 4-time Olympian. He played at 3 Olympics and coached at 1 Olympics. And my mother played at 2 World Championships for the Opals.
Wow.
And I have 3 sisters, and 3 of us all played for Victoria Metro, the state team, and also played at a high level of basketball. Myself, I grew up as a Melbourne Tiger junior from the age of 6 and then all the way through to under 18. I was a representative of the AIS, now Centre of Excellence, along with another sister of mine, Luella Tomlinson. I did the college pathway in the United States, in Alabama, in the Deep South, and that was an experience and a fabulous one. And after that, I came back and played in the WNBL for Melbourne Tigers under my dad, Ray Tomlinson.
And you were also part of that World Cup Gold Gems team also.
Yes, back in 1993, we won the first gold medal for women's basketball ever, representing Australia. Back then, it was the under-21 national junior team where my dad was the head coach and I was one of those players. And last year, we had our 30-year reunion.
Wow.
Which some of the players that you may have heard of, Christy Harrower, Michelle Brogan, Joe Hill, Jenny Whittle, she was an Opal, Sally Phillips, Michelle Chandler, just to name a few.
A lot of big basketball names in that team. Just amazing. Okay, look, I'm sorry. This one's going to bother me, but I've got to ask the question. What was it like going from Melbourne to Alabama?
I know, really. I was always a fan of LSU. My dad coached against Sue Gunter at one stage. Sue Gunter was the head women's basketball coach for the USA senior women's team at one stage, I believe, and the national junior team. Dad coached against her, I believe, at one Olympics, and also coached against her with the Australian national junior team. So growing up, I always had the ambition to play at LSU, but didn't quite work out for me. But I ended up playing Division 1 college basketball in the end anyway. That was obviously at Troy State, Alabama.
We've had a few people on who've been to colleges in some of the smaller places. When you landed at Troy State, what'd you think?
And it was night time, and I was picked up by the basketball coach. All I remember was driving down this highway. Both sides, there was nothing to be seen. I was just thinking I was going to America. There's going to be buildings everywhere and lights everywhere, and it was just going to be absolutely insanely wild. And I got there and I felt like I was in the woods. I mean, there were just trees everywhere. It was pitch black dark, and I'm driving down the highway, no lights. You know, as a 20-year-old then, it was quite scary. But, you know, obviously with the Southern hospitality, they just opened their arms, and it was amazing from there on then. And I actually ended up staying there for 10 years. So I went to college for 4 years, and then I was on the Auburn women's basketball staff for 4 years. And then I transferred over to Georgia Tech. So I went to college for 4 years, and then I worked for 6 years after that.
Was it difficult to find your feet once you graduated from Troy State? Was it difficult to find your feet afterward at Auburn? And how did that opportunity come up for you?
The head coach of Auburn University is Joe Champy. Joe Champy had been coaching at Auburn University for approximately 30 years. Back then, for the under-21 national team, we used to train for 3 years ahead of time. And we used to go overseas and play against all these colleges: University of Tennessee, LSU, Auburn University, Georgia Tech, you know, and we spent a lot of time playing against the USA to better ourselves. In that being said, Dad had made a relationship with Joe Champy, the Auburn head coach, and I was able to connect with Joe Champy, and he gave me a job after I got my degree in a Bachelor of Arts or Psychology.
After all of that, you're now working on providing pathways to college for Australian players. First of all, how did that come about? And secondly, what's involved?
So while I was at Auburn and at Georgia Tech, I was introduced to the recruiting and scouting landscape, so to speak. I was recruiting Australians back then at Auburn, and I learnt the pathway. In 2007, I brought those ideas back to Melbourne, hence why I opened up and started my own business. I wanted to give all this information on to the next generation coming up. And here we are in 2024. I've been doing it since now 2007.
Wow.
So going on nearly 20 years now. I've built all these relationships with the USA coaches, and I can connect them to all the girls that are wanting to take this option to the USA colleges through this, like, social media, and just getting my name out there and my company to let the broader landscape know about what I do and how I can help the junior players coming through. I do travel around Australia, scouting and recruiting players from time to time at the Australian National Championships, so at the club level. Obviously, being a Melbourne girl, I'm able to see a lot of the club teams play on a Friday evening, so I can scout the players there. But generally speaking, I like to surround myself with the younger girls coming up and educate the parents and the kids on what's available to them after they graduate from high school.
And when you're liaising with some of the coaches and head coaches from the major colleges in the US, what type and level of information do they provide to you about what they're looking for? Does it go into as much detail as, like, you know, wingspan, skill set, things like that, or what information do they provide you to help make your job easier?
Well, it kind of works the other way around. Each college at the end of the season are looking for someone different and different positions, and every college team is going to be slightly different. Okay. So really what I need from the parents is highlights, and our parents are not really equipped in that area. So to speak, that's where USA Kids, their parents are always filming, and they're so much ahead of the game when it comes to that. I have U12 players come to me saying, Sam, can you help me get to college? Yes, I can connect you, etc. But we need footage of you playing in order for me to sell your game to these college coaches. So getting highlights of your game is really important, because how can we sell your game across the waters when we've got no highlights? Unfortunately, that's kind of how it's worked in the past. We've got tours, opening up all over the place. I understand that. But I've always been able to do it because of my connections with the USA coaches. And I've been doing this since 2007. I'm able to pretty much land these girls a scholarship just on their performance.
So you're really just like an epic matchmaker, but in the basketball world.
Internationally.
International matchmaker. So they have those Netflix shows of Indian matchmaker, Jewish matchmaker. They got to start a new Netflix show, basketball matchmaker, about you, Sam.
And I love being around the junior girls. I did the pathway myself. I was a gem and a gold medalist at that back in 1993. I'm an advocate for the Australian junior national team. Of late, I went to the Under-19 World Cup in Thailand in 2019. That was with kids like Mila Goodchild and Agnes Napu. They were on that Australian junior national team. Mila going off to Duke through my services, and then also Agnes going to Stanford University. They were two examples of the girls I helped get over to the US.
Gosh, and your basketball pedigree aside, those two examples are very high caliber examples. Like, anyone signing to Duke ever, particularly an Australian, is like an achievement. So you helping someone sign to Duke and Stanford, and correct me if I'm wrong, but before Agnes, Alana Smith was the first Australian to be signed to Stanford, and I think the second and then I think it was Isaac White, and then I think it was Agnes was only the second Australian female to be committed to Stanford, I think.
Yeah, that was, I believe.
That's huge.
Yeah, they are pretty big schools. And those scholarships now are worth well over $500,000 to Duke University and universities like those prestige schools. Their women's basketball programs are always nearly ranked in the top 25. Now, obviously, you also need to be quite good academically and also have the best performances on the court. Because let's be honest, you're not going there. Yes, you end up with an amazing degree from those universities. What the parents forget about sometimes, you're actually going there on a basketball scholarship. So you're not going there because you're academic. And when you go there, you're going there for 4 years. At least you don't end up with a HEX fee, and it's a free scholarship, so to speak. What an amazing experience. Now, with the NIL, that's just probably a whole nother conversation and collectibles from the universities.
So just going back to the point about film for a minute, you were saying that most parents aren't taking film of their kids. How much harder does that make it for you if by not having the film available?
Oh, it's very hard. If you come to me when your child's in 12th grade and you've got no film of them playing in year 11 and year 12, how can I market you to the next level overseas? It just makes it extremely hard. These tours, the exposure tours that are popping up all over the place, again, it's another option. It's a great option. But, These tours cost anywhere between $7,000 and $15,000. Parents don't always have this money to help the kids get over there and do that. Now, there's so many companies doing it. Okay, so I'm saying roughly approximately between 7 and 15,000. Okay. I have always been kind of against it because I've been able to put the kids over there without having to have the parents pay for these exposure tours. Okay. Because it is so expensive. And with the cost of living, you know, it's very hard for me to come to you and ask you for $12,000 just so my kid can go over to the States to play approximately, you know, 5 to 8 games of basketball only, you know, is a big ask. And the amount of money you have to pay for your child at the moment from the ages of under 12 to under 18, I know in Melbourne, and you're driving on a Friday night all over the state, and you're paying registration for tournaments and registration for VJBL, the Victorian Basketball Rep Association. You're paying a lot of money already as it is. I'm trying to help the parents navigate the pathway without having to spend thousands and thousands of dollars for these tours. I believe it can be done on just highlight alone.
And you'd rather have, you know, hey, parent, just set up your iPhone on a tripod, film your kids' games. You'd rather spend the money on getting someone to professionally edit your footage to make a highlight reel than you are on some of those exposure tours, because I imagine as well, the exposure tours sound like a great idea, but it's not a guaranteed scholarship, and it's also not a guaranteed exposure into the right kind of people and programs that you want to be exposed to as well.
Absolutely. And I know the levels in Division 1, right? So in Division 1 women's basketball alone, there's 365 schools. There's roughly, we don't have the Pac-12 anymore, so there's roughly, I believe, 31 conferences. And within Division 1, you've got that high major, which are the Power 4 conferences, like your Dukes, Kentuckys, your Stanford, UCLA, your big schools. And then you've got the mid-major, then you've got the low major. I know about all those landscapes that are happening at the moment, and that have been happening for the last 20 odd years that I've been doing this. And the relationships with the coaches is really important. And obviously to understand the game. I'm kind of working as a liaison between the Australian players and the USA coaches.
So, look, I've got to be honest, I'm a bit surprised because I would have thought the associations would have been shooting game film and making it available to players. Here's footage of your last game. Here's footage of, so that it would be available for these opportunities.
I believe that we're doing more of that now. We're starting to each, I believe the clubs and associations are selecting a person to film those games. Now, I have heard from players' parents that for some unknown reason, they're not overly sharing this game footage.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know why. I don't know what the problem is, if it's a money thing or what's going on, but it's not being advertised as such that you can get a copy of all this.
And I think based on what someone told me up here in Queensland, this happened many years ago as well, where all of the games were supposed to be filmed and then all of the film was supposed to be shared with every team. But it was the association's responsibility to do that. And there were always some associations who weren't sharing despite receiving all of the other games from other teams, so therefore having access to other scouts and footage and whatnot, some associations weren't doing their part. And I think when it's on the onus of the associations as individuals to do that, you can't always rely on them for whatever reason, understaffed, incompetent, don't know how to open a computer, I don't know, for whatever reason. But when the onus of those things are put on association, I don't think some associations understand its importance or how important it can be and don't understand the purpose of it and therefore won't prioritise it.
I mean, these kids are our future and they're just kids. And I understand we've got to be careful with what we show, what we record. We've got all these roadblocks, so to speak, what we can video record at this time. I mean, it's hard. All I'm saying is us as Australians, we're behind the 8 ball when recording our footage, our games for our kids. We're behind. Somehow it needs to be worked out where we have better access for our kids to be exposed to colleges in America if they want to be able to take this pathway.
It's frustrating, these sorts of issues. It really is. And I understand. But look, Sam, I got to say, at least you're giving an opportunity to kids, and particularly parents who don't necessarily have the resources to be able to go on these overseas trips, which, it's not an inconsequential amount of money because it's the cost to go on the tour and then whatever you spend while you're over there as well. And, the US dollar is worth way more than the Australian dollar. So it really starts to add up pretty quickly. The opportunity that you're providing is a really spectacular opportunity for kids and who are trying to get through that college pathway. And so, for any parents who are listening to this, film your kids. Put your iPhone on a tripod and film your kids because it's invaluable for opportunities like this.
Absolutely. Where I'm coming from, I need footage from mainly year 11 and year 12. If we can get it from year 10, I mean, that's where it really starts. That's even better. College coaches cannot reach out to your child until they're in 11th grade anyway. That's an NCAA rule. So, yeah, we need highlights. I can't express that enough.
And Sam, so we've talked about how you obviously help athletes in Australia get great college scholarships. Is part of your service to help athletes who are looking to transfer as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you go into the transfer portal, you're not happy where you are for some reason and you enter into the transfer portal. Now, obviously, you've got to be careful going into the transfer portal. Don't be contacting me because you haven't heard from schools. All of a sudden you're freaking out because, these are things that can really happen and you could not get contacted out of the transfer portal. They end up with 1,000 girls in the transfer portal at the end of every season after March Madness. And I do have coaches call me and asking me, have you got any Aussies going into the transfer portal? After the end of every season, I do get that question.
Yeah. The transfer portal, are athletes allowed to be approached by other colleges before they enter, or is it to enter at your own risk and see what happens?
It is enter at your own risk and see what happens, but college coaches are not allowed to contact you until you enter the transfer portal, correct?
So even if you have conversations with coaches that they can't even say, hey, we want to recruit you, go into the portal, they can't do that at all or give any kind of hint away. It's just so... it's even scary for me as a fan to see when high-profile college athletes enter the portal. And in my mind, I'm like, they must know something, somehow, that if they enter the portal, someone's going to pick them up or they know where they're going. Or perhaps they are just safe enough in knowing that I'm a high enough profile athlete in the league. Someone's going to grab me.
Exactly. It is a risky business. Going into the transfer portal, and you best be confident that you've done well, possibly in 1 or 2 or 3 of your games that you played in previously, or that you have good stats to go on, which sometimes that's why you're in the transfer portal, because you haven't had any game time. You're transferring because you're not getting game time. So I'm like, did you get good stats this year? All their games are filmed over there. So can we send one of your best games that you had last season out to the other US coaches, to once again sell you in the market? It can be really exhausting going through that avenue.
How structured are the rules around college? Because I think one of the things that from talking to people who've been in college, there's a lot of rules around transfer portal is one, but basically around everything. And so therefore it's also important for parents and for athletes to understand that it's not just a matter of, hey, we can just sort of do what we want. There's a whole structure around NCAA that generally we're not that familiar with here in Australia.
No. And that's what I really want to educate the parents and the kids in this pathway. But I need to get access to you in year 8 and year 9, etc. For example, you've got to have 16 core classes from year 9 to year 12 consecutively. You've got to have all your ducks in a row from year 9. So if parents don't know this landscape, it's very hard to backpedal, and your options of going to college will be limited if these steps aren't done correctly.
The main question I wanted to ask you, Sam, is when you're working with these young up-and-coming athletes, what type of advice or information are you conscious of giving them that you wish you received when you were their age?
Oh, I would have done things differently, that's for sure. Obviously, we didn't have the internet back then. The advice, is that what you're asking?
Yeah, advice or information that you would pass down to the current generation, like better access to some kind of guidance telling us what our options actually were.
Okay, well, obviously we talked about the highlights, right? We need highlights made available for these kids so we can market them to the US colleges, because not everybody has access to those exposure tools. Obviously, to get stuck into your books and stay in school and work on your grades and do your best not to fall below a C. We need to keep our GPA up high. What we'd say over here, our ATAR score, we need to keep that in the C plus and above in year 9, year 10, year 11, year 12, because they're the academic transcripts that they're going to be potentially looking at. And then get connected to myself or Aussie Basketball USA, and I will guide you through your path to success after graduating from high school.
And then the last question I wanted to ask was about one of our previous podcast guests, Lara Somfai. She is a hot prospect. She's currently at IMG Academy. She is a hot college prospect. She's narrowed her list to UConn, Duke, Stanford, Tennessee, and Virginia Tech. If you were to pick where she's going out of that short list, where do you reckon she's going to go?
I believe Stanford or UConn. Now, if she wants to go the more academic way, of course, she's going to probably choose Stanford over UConn, but she's always had her head on straight as far as really being able to be seen by UConn. So it's a tough one, but if you had to narrow it down to one, I'm going to say UConn.
Interesting.
Okay.
At this time.
Very good. Good answer, Sam.
So, Sam, you have raised a whole bunch of really interesting topics and questions, particularly around. Look, I'm sorry, I'm still stunned about the whole footage thing, and the parents got to pay to be able to get that footage. But yeah, definitely, we would love to get you back and with one of the athletes so we can get deeper into a whole conversation about this, because it's an area that's starting to grow within basketball in Australia, that kids are seeing the US college pathway as being more accessible. And I think it's important to be able to get as much information out as possible about it.
Yes, of course. And some of the higher end athletes that have been helping from the Centre of Excellence, I've got some coming back from America as we speak right now on the plane, coming back from top colleges over there in the US. And it's so exciting to see who they're going to pick as such. They've gone over there with their parents, all expenses paid, flying around America, going to all the different colleges to see which one they like the best. Then they come home and we discuss further with the families on, the pros and cons, and I guide them, assistance and guidance as far as choosing the school of their dreams. It's just a huge landscape as to what's available for these kids moving forward. I really want to get it out there as to what's available for these girls, because a lot of them want to do it.
Okay. Thanks for your time. It really,
love, you guys are doing an amazing job. Oh my God. And thank you so much for having me.
No worries. Thanks, Sam. Thanks for your time. And definitely we want to get you back.
Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, Sam. So also, we had an opportunity to talk at the Women in Sports Symposium run by Western Sydney University, their business school, which has a focus area of sports management, where we got to talk a little bit about non-traditional media like podcasts and how it helps to build fan engagement. It was an interesting opportunity to talk about those things, but it was also interesting to hear other people talking about women's sport and different facets of the sport. One thing that was interesting, we managed to catch up with previous podcasts, Casey Simons and Phil Morgan. But yeah, it was an opportunity to talk about how particularly podcasts help to build fan engagement in a way that traditional media doesn't.
Were there many other podcasts or alternative media outlets representing themselves and their product at the symposium?
None at all. Look, we were the only ones talking about this. There were a lot of academics in the symposium. There were some really interesting perspectives taken, particularly in some of the analysis that was being done on women's sports. There were a couple of people there who were doing a lot of statistical analysis of women's sports and how women's sports are being promoted. So I mean, I'd probably have to say that we saw some interesting areas that we haven't seen before, just because we don't normally get exposure to the academic route. It was great to get an opportunity to speak to them. I believe that they've announced that they are going to be doing another one next year. And I just want to give a shout out to Jess Richards and Michelle O'Shea for giving us the opportunity to be there. And finally, I want to talk about the fact that this weekend the Ladies' League opened in Sydney. They are at 245 Oxford Street in Darlinghurst, so they're now open. And so if you want to catch women's sports and have a drink and have something to eat, that's the place to go.
I think there's just one more important thing that I think is worthwhile bringing up. So
Sure.
During Series 6, we had our good friend Kaz as a guest for one of our episodes to talk about the London Lions women's team and their historic season that they had. I think she did mention in that episode perhaps that due to funding, that iconic London Lions women's team were no longer going to be.
Yes.
But since we spoke to Kaz, the London Lions Basketball Club has since been acquired by Tessanet, a tech company, and a shareholder of another major club in the EuroLeague. So the new ownership group's dedicated to introducing operational sustainability practices to secure long-term health and success of the club. And as part of the new chapter, player budgets will be aligned with the newly established salary cap, ensuring a fair and competitive environment for all athletes involved. So there is hope yet for the London Lions, and hopefully they'll able to restore their former glory sooner rather than later.
That's great news. That is really great news to hear that the London Lions have got a lifeline. You know, particularly after their performance that Kaz talked about. It was a shame to see that the team was going to fold.
Yeah, definitely, especially with the high caliber players that they were able to attract in that season. And especially it looks like basketball is on the rise in the UK, especially given how huge that crowd was for their final.
Yeah.
So yeah, it would have been a shame that was all lost, but hopefully now with a new investor, they can continue to help it grow.
Absolutely. And so this episode brings us to an end of Series 6 for Shooting the Breeze. And we're going to take a well-deserved break. Make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so you get our latest pod. And we really appreciate if we could get a like and a review so we can extend the reach to more listeners. And don't forget, follow us on Instagram, Twitter and LinkedIn.